Livid Sampler is a basic sampling application designed to work with Livid Controllers. This is a final update to the first release of Livid Sampler, an open source MaxMSP patch, application, and BSD plugin. This is final because it was done in Cycling74's Max 4.6 and pluggo, which is no longer sold or supported. And Sampler is also going to evolve into something much more sophisticated. The real reason for this release is to put a fun and simple sampler into the hands of Livid customers that is designed to work instantly with your controller, and hope it sparks some discussion and requests on what it might do in the future. There are a minimum of controls and settings, letting you concentrate on playing rather than making minute changes. We are planning to release some software using the sampler as the foundation, and we'd love to hear what you would like to do with it, what more you want from it, as well as test the playback mechanism for stability and usefulness. As you think about what you might want to see, keep in mind that we don't intend for this to replace or compete with software that you already use. We do intend to make a software package that maximizes interactivity, quick production, and musical focus on our controllers and others. First, when you open the app, there is an 8x8 grid of buttons, one for each sample. The sample inspector lets you make selections, an envelope, set some basic properties, and filter each sample. There are also some global controls and a preset area for creating multiple configurations. The configure menu has the audio configuration screen for selecting your audio output, and a simple recording widget for recording your jams. The first thing you'll need to do is load some sounds. There's a few ways to do this. The Folder to Grid button opens a dialog so you can select a folder of sounds that will fill the grid, starting from the first button. The File to Button button opens a dialog so you can select a single sound file for an individually selected button. You can also drag files from folders from the Finder or Windows Explorer into the grid, populating from the point you drop the file. Now that you have some sounds loaded, let's see what you can do with them. You can trigger them with the mouse, or better with your Livid controller that is automatically detected on startup. When you press a button, you need to hold it down for continued playback. This might be exactly what you want, however, there are a few changes you can make to each button sample using the inspector. The waveform selection screen provides an interface to create a smaller selection of the entire sample. The Zoom Plus and Zoom Minus make it easier to refine your selection. The Select All button will return the playback selection to the entire sample. Below this is the envelope, allowing you to set an amplitude envelope that works for the entire length of the selection. Simple settings like volume, speed, and pan are self-explanatory and can be set for every sample. You can also change the mode, loop, and sync settings and stop playback of the sample if needed. The playback mode determines what happens when you press a button on your Livid controller. With gate mode, playback begins when you press the button and stops when you release it, or the sample selection ends, whichever is first. In trigger mode, playback begins when you press the button and stops when the end of the sample or sample selection is reached. If looping is enabled, playback will continue until the stop or stop all button is pressed. In toggle mode, playback begins when you press the button and stops when the button is pressed again, or when the sample ends. If looping is enabled, playback will continue until the button is pressed again, or stop all button is pressed. There's also two peak notch filters that let you boost or cut frequencies of each sample. You can set the frequency gain and resonance for each filter with the mouse, and use the slider to mix in the filter with the unfiltered signal. The Global Controls button turns many of the inspector's controls into global controls that will change the settings on all samples loaded into the grid. The Stop All button stops playback on all samples, no matter what their setting. Sync BPM adjusts the BPM for all samples that have sync enabled. And of course, master volume affects the final volume output. The block and OM64 control most aspects of the sampler. The grid is used to trigger sample playback. Function buttons are used to create many of the settings and adjust presets. Refer to the image files that describe the mappings. Let's take a look at sync mode. I'll enable sync for 3 different samples and put them in the appropriate modes. First, let's play them without sync and hear that they jumble around. When we enable sync and start 2 samples at the same time, they play back in time, shifting their pitch. The software calculates a minimal amount of pitch shift that can make them match to the sync BPM, so sometimes a high BPM will actually slow down a sample. While you can see this sampler is immediately useful for some basic applications such as radio or theater, you will probably just want to pick it up like you might pick up a guitar and jam out, and you may want to record some of this to disk. The record widget makes this really easy.